Preamble. The official historical account of the World's Columbian Exposition of 1893 in Chicago paints a heroic picture of American ingenuity. We are told that in a matter of months, architects and engineers conjured the White City out of the mud of Jackson Park, a stunning, massive complex of classical structures, often dwarfing anything seen in the young nation. It was a triumph of technology and aspiration, a clear sign of the United States' destiny as a global power. However, when we compare this official version with the visual evidence, uncomfortable questions begin to surface. The sheer scale and architectural sophistication of structures like the Palace of Fine Arts or the Women's Building suggest a level of engineering prowess and, critically, a speed of construction that strains the credibility of late 19th century resources. According to the alternative history perspective, the White City was not built from scratch. It was inherited. These were the remnants of a previous, highly advanced and globally unified civilization, a past wiped clean by an event often referred to as the Great Reset, or a mud flood. If these buildings were so magnificent, capable of inspiring an entire generation, why were they allegedly demolished immediately after the fair closed? Why wipe away the very proof of American industrial and artistic capability? Official history cites temporary materials and logistical costs, yet the remnants that survived, like the Museum of Science and Industry, prove the structures were made of durable, high-quality materials far exceeding what was necessary for a 6-month exhibition. What if the destruction wasn't about cost, but about concealment? What if the true legacy of the White City was not its architecture, but the technology it housed and represented? A form of energy production that threatened the emerging petroleum and coal barons. The official narrative ensures we look forward, focused on the progress of the steam engine and fossil fuels. But the alternative path suggests a hidden past of clean, limitless energy deliberately buried. This is the central mystery that pulls two modern engineers, a sharp pragmatist and a dedicated idealist, into the deep, forgotten infrastructure beneath Chicago. Their mission to modernize a conventional power grid will lead them directly to evidence of this suppressed technology, forcing them to confront the true foundations of American industrial history, and decide whether to expose the past or protect a powerful and dangerous secret for the future of their nation. Chapter 1. The Copper Ghost of Jackson Park. The early summer air of Chicago felt thick and heavy, smelling faintly of Lake Michigan mixed with exhaust fumes, a typical Midwest welcome. Liz Gray, a woman who measured the world in efficiency and kilowatts, adjusted her safety helmet, its hard plastic shell feeling flimsy compared to the monumental history pressing down on them. She glanced at the GPS reading on her ruggedized tablet. They were standing right in Jackson Park, where 130 years ago, the Grand White City had supposedly risen and fallen. 2,000 acres of glory, built in a year, torn down in 6 months, Liz muttered, shaking her head. Classic American hustle. Unbelievable waste of capital, though. Not waste, Liz. Concealment. Look at the specs. They supposedly fabricated those massive multi-story domes out of plaster of Paris and wood. Think about the compressive strength needed. Think about the logistics. I'm telling you, it's a cover story for the Great Reset. These buildings were inherited, remnants of a single global civilization. They just dressed them up for the fair before knocking them down to bury the evidence. Liz sighed, pushing open the rusted steel door leading to the defunct municipal tunnel system. It felt like stepping back 70 years, not 130. Rob, you can't build the entire foundation of modern American infrastructure on a conspiracy theory. We're here to evaluate a substation that's been off-grid since the Korean War. We stick to the National Electrical Code and physics, not fantasies about forgotten empires and mud floods. But that's the point. Why are we still on a 60 Hz standard? Why did they choose a system that required miles of inefficient copper wiring over, say, Tesla's wireless transmission?
Follow the money, Liz. It wasn't about efficiency, it was about control. They descended a slippery flight of concrete steps, the air growing colder and damper. Their job was to follow an old transmission line, a line that, according to the official schematics, should only lead to a dead-end junction box deep beneath what was once the agricultural building. They walked almost half a mile underground, their headlamps slicing through the blackness, revealing rough-hewn concrete and, occasionally, patches of oddly compact, dry, light-colored soil clinging to the ceilings. The tunnel finally opened into a circular chamber, about 30 feet in diameter, a space that absolutely did not exist on any blueprint Liz possessed. It was a cavern carved out of earth and rock, filled almost halfway with a strange silty mixture that looked like dried, fine-grained mud or sand. And in the center, towering above the mudline, was the structure. It wasn't a junction box. It was a set of 4 massive, perfectly wound copper coils, each easily 10 feet tall, encased in a thick, non-ferrous ceramic. They hummed with silence, unconnected to any power source, their design alien to any 19th century technology Liz had ever studied. The craftsmanship was immaculate, the metal untarnished by time. Rob gasped, dropping his backpack. The White City wasn't about plaster. It was a giant antenna array. Liz, her pragmatism suddenly undermined by the inexplicable presence of 20,000 pounds of meticulously engineered non-functional copper, slowly walked toward the nearest coil. She noticed a faint outline in the ceramic casing near the base, partially obscured by the sandy fill. She reached down and brushed away the grit. It was a small, perfectly square brass plaque engraved with stylized, non-Latin script that wasn't Greek, Roman, or even Masonic, but resembled a kind of flowing electrical diagram. Rob, this shouldn't exist. Not here. Not like this.
Chapter 2. Amperes and Arguments. Back in their rented North Side loft, overlooking a glittering modern Chicago skyline powered by conventional electricity, the mood was tense. The massive copper coils lay only in their photographs and their imaginations, but the implications were heavy enough to crush the city. Liz meticulously cross-referenced the coil's specifications, its wire gauge, diameter, and the apparent absence of any thermal or structural stress, with every known patent and engineering document from 1890 to 1910. "It's geometrically impossible," Liz declared, tossing a heavy textbook onto the wooden floor. "The inductance required to produce usable energy from a coil that size, using the limited sources they had then, would have needed astronomical voltage. It would have been spectacularly inefficient, a fire hazard, and a joke. They wouldn't have built it, Rob. It's an insane prototype." Rob, hunched over his laptop, which was displaying a grainy photo of the 1893 Women's Building, smiled grimly. "Exactly. If you judge it by the physics of 60 Hertz wired energy, it makes no sense. But what if it wasn't supposed to be powered? What if it was a receiver, a conduit for atmospheric or telluric energy, something already available, clean, and free? That's what Tesla was chasing. That's what the reset was designed to suppress. Think about it, Liz. If the entire nation, the entire world ran on energy that cost nothing to distribute, what happens to Standard Oil, to coal mines, to the railroads?" Their argument took on a sharp, patriotic edge. Liz, fiercely proud of the American Industrial Revolution, retorted, "The American system succeeded because it was practical and standardized. This talk of suppression is lazy. You can't just blame a global conspiracy for every technological dead end. Our standard system built this city, built our interstate highways, built the power lines that connect all 50 states. You're trying to prove the entire foundation of this country is a lie." "No, I'm trying to prove that our nation inherited a better truth and that a few greedy individuals chose a worse path for profit, burying the true American potential under tons of mud and lies," Rob countered, pacing the small space. That white city was a museum to a golden age, which they then systematically dismantled to make us believe that only their progress mattered. Just then, a soft knock came at the door. Standing outside was an elderly woman, dressed immaculately but humbly, carrying a small store-bought lemon pie. "Pardon me, I'm Mrs. Klein from down the hall. My husband and I heard some rather spirited discussion. Is everything all right, dear? You sound stressed." Liz, annoyed by the interruption, forced a polite smile. "Oh, we're fine, ma'am. Just a heated engineering debate about old power grids in the park." Mrs. Klein's eyes, surprisingly bright, darted past Liz toward Rob's laptop screen where the image of the colossal copper coil was still visible. She paused, tilting her head. "The park? Yes. So much history buried there, isn't it? My grandfather used to talk about the buildings. He said they were afraid not of the flames, dear. They were afraid of the silence." Before either Liz or Rob could ask what she meant, the old woman handed Liz the pie, wished them a good night, and walked briskly down the hallway. Rob stared at the closed door, his jaw slack. He snatched up his laptop. "The silence, Liz! That phrase, they were afraid not of the flames, they were afraid of the silence. I saw it in a digitized copy of an anonymous 1895 newspaper clipping I found yesterday. It was attributed to a watchman at the fair just before the official demolition. How could she possibly know that?"
Chapter 3. The 60 Hertz Lie. The unexpected visit from Mrs. Klein shifted the ground beneath Liz's pragmatic feet. She couldn't dismiss the coincidence. It was too specific, too niche. It chipped away at her conviction that Rob was merely chasing phantom data. Meanwhile, Rob's skepticism about the system seemed tragically validated. His primary project back in Seattle, a conventional solar efficiency booster he'd been developing with university funding, was abruptly and inexplicably cut off. The email cited shifts in funding priorities, but the timing, just days after their subterranean discovery, made Rob furious. "See? They let you build incremental, profitable garbage, but the moment you sniff real, foundational change, the corporate tap gets shut off. It's a systemic chokehold, Liz." "Don't personalize it, Rob. It's probably just bad bureaucracy," Liz argued, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. She had spent the last 2 days pulling every string she had within the massive Chicago utility framework, attempting to secure original blueprints of the 1893 power distribution for Jackson Park. What she finally received was a series of heavily redacted, almost farcical diagrams. Entire sections, critical junction points directly corresponding to their camera location, were marked NA, or, bafflingly, Client-Side Maintenance Zone. "This is not bureaucracy," Liz conceded, pushing the paper away. "This is a deliberate blank slate. No one leaves a 30-foot chamber full of copper off the books unless they really want it forgotten." They returned to the chamber that night, bringing a high-end laser measuring system. They needed to move past the speculative geometry of photographs and get hard, verifiable data. Rob worked the laser, carefully mapping the curves of the coils and the dimensions of the chamber. Liz focused on the structure's placement relative to the established coordinates of the 1893 fairgrounds, mapping its center point using an old survey marker they had uncovered on the surface. After hours of work, they sat on the muddy floor, reviewing the results. "Look at the calculated resonance frequency," Rob pointed out, scrolling through the analysis data. "The wire gauge, the core diameter, the length. This configuration is optimized for a ridiculously high frequency, maybe hundreds of kilohertz." Liz frowned. 100 kilohertz? That's completely incompatible with the standard Edison-Westinghouse systems of the time, which were pushing 25 or 60 hertz, and it's incompatible with our modern 60 hertz grid. Why design something that couldn't be integrated?
Because it wasn't meant to be integrated, Rob countered triumphantly. This isn't AC or DC as we know it, Liz. This is something else. This confirms the Great Reset theory. The previous civilization had a unified global system, perhaps a high-frequency resonant energy structure, and the people who took over, the 60 Hz people, dismantled or suppressed it to introduce their profitable, controllable, wired system. Just as Liz was about to dismantle his theory piece by technical piece, her hand, resting on the coil to steady herself, felt a distinct vibration. Her professional multimeter, which she had clipped to the coil's metal surface as a test point, registered a minuscule, almost zero voltage reading, but the needle twitched. Then, a low subsonic hum filled the chamber, the sound feeling more like pressure in their ears than audible noise. Rob's eyes widened in the dark. It's resonating, Liz. We're near a power source, not a generator, but the source itself. It's waiting.
Chapter 4. The Resonance of a Forgotten Era. The low hum intensified, a deep, unsettling note that rattled the dust off the ceramic casing. Liz backed away, her safety protocols screaming at her. "Rob, shut the equipment down. We have no idea what frequency this thing is operating at. We could fry ourselves." "If this is an abandoned prototype, it's abandoned for a reason. It's volatile." "Volatile or revolutionary?" Rob shouted back over the deepening drone, a wild glint in his eyes. He rummaged through his pack and pulled out a salvaged, heavily insulated length of power cable, the kind used for massive industrial equipment, which he'd recovered from the muddy floor on their first visit. "We have to know, Liz. We can't just walk away from this. This isn't about Standard Oil anymore. This is about what America could have been if it hadn't been steered off course." "And what about what America is?" Liz retorted, her voice cracking with the strain of their conflict. "We operate on 60 Hz, Rob. We have a stable functioning grid. You're talking about hooking up a completely alien, potentially enormous power source to a device you pulled out of your backpack. That's not science. That's engineering suicide. If we generate a feedback loop, we could take out a substation, maybe half of the loop." "No, we're talking about validating a fundamental systemic lie. If this works, it proves that the very fabric of our energy-dependent society is a deliberate, profitable sham built on the ashes of something pure. Don't you want to know the truth, Liz? Doesn't the engineer in you want to see if the forgotten physics are better than the physics we were taught?" He pulled out his portable, high-capacity inverter, designed to convert solar DC into usable AC. It was a rugged, expensive piece of American equipment, but it was wholly inadequate for whatever this monstrous coil represented. Against every ounce of Liz's professional training, she watched, paralyzed by a terrifying curiosity, as Rob hastily stripped the insulation from the salvaged cable and clipped one end to a barely visible, corroded contact point at the base of the coil and the other to the input terminals of the inverter. "Here we go, Liz. For the real America," he whispered, his finger hovering over the power switch. He flipped it. The low hum instantly vanished, replaced by an ear-splitting snap. Then a blinding bluish-white light exploded from the center of the coil, engulfing the small chamber. Liz staggered back, shielding her eyes, her mind registering an impossibility. The light had no source, no arc. It simply was. The air temperature in the chamber spiked instantly. In that fraction of a second, in the searing, impossible light, they both saw it. A shared, vivid hallucination, or a glimpse of memory projected onto the very walls of the chamber. It wasn't the muddy, temporary White City. It was a vision of a perfectly unified metropolis, stretching out to the horizon, silent, clean, and bathed in a soft, constant glow with no visible wires or power lines crisscrossing the sky. The architecture was immaculate, untouched, a true golden age. Then, just as quickly as it began, the light collapsed. The snap died. They were plunged into absolute, echoing darkness. Liz fumbled for her headlamp, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. When the beam finally cut through the blackness, Rob was slumped against the coil, breathing heavily. The coil itself was no longer cool. It radiated an intense, clean heat. Every piece of equipment Rob had connected, the inverter, the salvaged cable, even his wallet and phone was melted slag, vaporized by a massive, momentary surge. Yet the chamber itself was intact. What was that? Liz asked, her voice thin. Rob slowly raised a shaking hand and touched the coil. That was free energy, Liz. Real energy. The kind that doesn't require a wire or a meter. And they buried it. They buried a whole world.
Chapter 5. Purity and Legacy. The silence that followed the surge was absolute, broken only by the drip of groundwater. They didn't speak again until they were back on the surface, shivering despite the summer heat, their hands covered in mud and a residual metallic smell. They sat on a damp park bench, watching the city awaken around them. "We can't expose this," Liz stated flatly, rubbing her temples. The pragmatist in her had returned, but she was now fused with a terrible new knowledge. Not now. If what we saw is true, if that coil is a gateway to unlimited, free power, it's not just a technical breakthrough, it's a systemic collapse waiting to happen. It invalidates every utility company, every oil well, every contract, every government treaty forged over the last century. Rob, the former conspiracy idealist, nodded, his energy spent. "You're right. My old goal was to expose the lie, to tear down the official narrative, but if we release this as an unverified artifact, it'll be instantly dismissed, confiscated, or worse, weaponized. We saw what kind of power that thing holds." Their mission had shifted from revealing a historical lie to preserving an invaluable American legacy. They agreed that the true patriotic act was not to cause chaos, but to responsibly reclaim the better technology for their future. The power that built the White City could still power the nation, but it had to be done safely, intelligently, and on their own terms. "We document every single dimension," Liz said, her professional tone returning, but filled with a new purpose. "We record the geological layers, the composition of the sand, the exact coordinates. We don't need the coil. We need the science behind the coil. We reverse engineer the principles, and then we build the next system. A clean, stable, silent American system, free of the old corporate controls." Rob pulled out his last working device, a basic dictaphone, and began detailing the measurements of the coil using encrypted code words for key concepts like resonance frequency and atmospheric tap. Liz, watching the rising sun hit the towering modern structures of Chicago, the very antithesis of the White City, felt a profound sense of responsibility. America, with all its flaws and its foundation built on a historical misdirection, was still their nation, and they now held the key to its truly exceptional future. They sealed the chamber entrance with the heavy steel door, adding several robust modern locks, knowing that no utility worker would ever look for a forgotten 30-foot cavern. They had buried the coil not to conceal the past, but to protect the future. Later that afternoon, sitting side by side on a crowded flight heading west over the vast Midwest plains, Liz glanced at Rob. "So what do we tell the utility company?" she asked, a smirk playing on her lips. Rob leaned back, closing his eyes. "We tell them the junction box was rusted out, and we recommended the standard 60 Hz fiber optic replacement pending funding approval. But we'll be writing the real report in a different code, won't we?" Liz smiled, looking down at the patchwork of farmland and power lines below, the infrastructure of the old wired energy system. She thought of the silent, clean glow of the unified city she had glimpsed. Their work was just beginning. Their mission wasn't to mourn a lost empire, but to quietly, patriotically resurrect its greatest gift for the sake of the United States. Yes, Rob, a different code, for a better legacy.